Hey folks, welcome in. We're excited that you're here with us to talk about sector strategies today. We'll give a few minutes for the full group to coalesce. But thanks for giving us some of your time today. We're excited to be with you. As you're coming into the room, feel free to put, a first name, a role, org, place, space, location into the chat just to let folks know where you're coming in from. It's always fun to see. I'm gonna model in the chat myself. Common curiosity right now, of course, is how much snow you've had in the last 24 to 48 hours, depending on which coast you're on. We'll take just about 30 more seconds and we'll start in earnest. All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm Jerry Maynor. I'm a senior director at JFF, part of our Pathways of Prosperity team that works primarily with partners all across the country, focused on connecting K-12, post-secondary education, and workforce development to build pathways to economic mobility. So really excited to have you here. For those of you who may be new to JFF or new to some of our virtual learning series, first, welcome. And we always like to ground a little bit with just who we are at JFF and what our Pathways to Prosperity Coalition is and does before we get into the specific content. All right, Haiti, move us forward. JFF is a 43-year-old nonprofit organization, and our North Star is really focused on creating economic advancement for all people. And so the work that drives us and our current North Star is ensuring that in the next 8 years or so, that 75 million Americans facing barriers to economic advancement will be in quality jobs. And we have a quality jobs framework that really defines that. And you may have been familiar too with the American Job Quality Study that JFF conducted just recently that really shines a light on the key components of what quality work looks like and how that impacts the well-being of workers across our country. So encourage you to check that out as well. But of course, we don't do that alone. We do that in partnership with folks like you all across the country and all across sectors. Keep going, Haiti. You're doing great. In our Pathways to Prosperity work, that typically really centers on the intersection of where K-12, post-secondary, and workforce and intermediaries intersect. And we've been doing this work since launching this network through the Pathways to Prosperity report in 2011. And the work is built around the community that you all represent and a large coalition of leaders in these spaces. And we, in addition to having these monthly learning series, we also have two annual in-person institutes, a spring and a fall national institute. And so we'll share more information about that if you're interested in joining us there. Next slide. We are here primarily to give you an insight into what we've been doing in terms of sector-based strategies today, but we also want you to know where and how our Pathways to Prosperity Network serves leaders like you. We have a network of state and regional leaders that we, again, convene and also offer direct fee-based services to. But we also have a broad coalition that you can engage in many no-cost ways, such as this. And then, of course, JFF also has a sort of summit called Horizons each summer that brings all of our stakeholders together in another powerful way to meet at the intersection of civic leaders, government leaders, um, employer partners, and many, many more. And so these are all ways in which you can engage with us at no cost ways, but also in ways that are focused on leveraging the power of resources that you have or that your partners have in the field to drive that impact. Um, when we enter these conversations, we just want to set a few norms that, what we value most is your presence in this moment. Like there's many things you could be doing with your time right now. The fact that you signed up and showed up is a really great indicator that this is valuable to you, and we want to make it valuable to you. So we'd love for you to interject with questions in the chat, and we'll also have time at the end for you to come off mute and join the conversation. We also want you to like center your human experience and expertise first. So we're not here to just like get the answers right. We're here to wrestle with really good questions. And we invite you to critique, to think provocatively about things we might be missing, things we haven't considered yet. And so we are all going to enter this conversation with curiosity and of course, an opportunity to learn together. So thanks for being here. And I'm going to kick it over to our team of speakers from here. So they'll each introduce themselves as they talk. So we're not going to do full introductions here. So Sarah, take it away.
Thanks, Jerry. It's so good to be with you all today and see you virtually. My name is Sarah Bennett, and Haiti, we can go ahead and skip, I think, to the next two slides, actually. But yeah, I'm based in St. Petersburg, Florida. I've been at JFF for about 5 years now. Prior to that, I came from sort of the workforce local government world. And I appreciate you indulging me at the intro of this to get a little nerdy and geek out for a minute about what do we mean by sector strategies. A lot of good actionable detail coming at you later in this call, but just level setting about what do we mean when we say sector strategies. And two things I think at the start of the call, just noting that sector strategies, usually when we're talking about it, they're regional and they're industry focused. So for instance, I live in St. Petersburg, Florida. So as you can imagine with Florida, there's a lot of retail, a lot of hospitality, a lot of food service occupations. But we don't want to just think about it as where I live in my city because we have a larger region to deal with. And the Tampa Bay region includes a lot more than that. For instance, my brother is an industrial maintenance tech, and he goes to Largo every day for work, right? So like there are industries outside of your city. So thinking about it as a regional strategy and what are the industries, sectors, and occupations that people might be considering because people do commute. So first of all, sector strategies are regional, and then they're also industry focused, and it's a way of really bringing together all of your partners in a region to think about your employers, your educational institutions, your community-based organizations, your workforce development agencies. How are they all working together and on the same page about what the sector needs to grow in your region, what it needs to do to pivot in your region to remain competitive? So it's really about problem solving together, but more than just your organization and more than just the immediate area where you live and work. Next slide, please. So why would you do this? This is a lot of work. You already have your internal strategy for a sector. So part of it is, again, thinking about priority occupations and skills. You don't have to talk to other people to find this a lot of times, right? Ray, later in the call, is one of JFF's local experts. There's a lot of data out there that can tell you. But what that data doesn't always give you is the underlying detail that's really helpful and actionable about, hey, how employers are thinking about using AI, how they're thinking about digital skills, which we'll also touch on later in this webinar. It's a way of gathering information and preparing for what's new in the industry. How are things changing? How are your healthcare occupations shifting in the next 5 to 10 years? And how is policy perhaps influencing that? It's a way of ensuring that your talent pipelines are inclusive, and that a new employer to the region knows the breadth of options of organizations that they can work with that can connect them to really strong talent pipelines, and also that there's dialogue and communication about how challenges around transit or childcare might be involved in what needs to happen in the region to make sure that this industry can thrive. And then also it's an opportunity to it's not just hiring, right? It's not just, okay, we have 12 people graduating from a cohort and you're hiring six. It's really about thinking about what does this sector need, even outside of immediate hiring concerns or workforce challenges. So it's about attracting investors to invest in this sector in your region. It's about research and development. How can employers even think about one another as resources to be thinking about R&D? It's about government advocacy and where can educational institutions and employers and workforce development agencies think about advocacy jointly. So it really is a little bit more holistic. And not to put a fine point on it, but in the next slide, what I'd encourage you all as one of your takeaways from this webinar is to just think about sector strategies as this broad, really helpful strategic umbrella. Sector strategies are not just a singular tech training program. It's really comprised of everyone who might be doing tech training and bringing them to the table, all the employers who need that tech talent. It's bringing folks together in a coalition to support one another. It's not just focused on a single employer. You have that one sexy employer that just moved to the region recently and everybody wants to get on their list to get hired there. But you have a lot of the supply chain, right? And the other smaller employers that build out this industry ecosystem. How are you making sure all of them have what they need to make this work? And it's not just focused on one occupation. When you're upskilling your talent from one role to the next, you're still going to need that entry-level talent as well, right? So trying to think about multiple occupations and skill sets at once, overlap, advancement opportunities. Again, what's the bigger umbrella and the bigger challenge that we're trying to solve for? It's about both near-term opportunities as well as long-term challenges, policy changes coming down the pike that we know about. I'm sure a lot of your regions have been navigating the tariff changes and how that's impacting your industries locally. So it's also about doing both, right? We're going to focus on the now and make sure that individuals are connected. And it's thinking about what are we going to need 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now to make sure that this industry thrives in the region that we live. Next slide, Heidi. So at their best, at their worst, they're a lot of work, right? But that's not a bad thing because at their best, all of that work and all that effort about bringing all these partners together means that there's increased agency. It means that you not only have just the anchor post-secondary institution being the only ones talking with employers. That CBO who's doing trainings is at the table. That K-12 ESC is at the table. It means that we're working on this together, and it means alignment. And that can be in terms of your organizational policies and procedures aligning to others, right? So there's that ecosystem where learners and students can really move and thrive. And then adaptation, right? So the fact that, or adaptation, the fact that we can shift and change together as the industry shifts and changes. So at its best, taking that more holistic, not just program-based approach can set you up for thinking globally as a region. Thank you for being wonky with me. I'm now going to transfer to my wonderful colleague, Leah Eggers, to give you a little bit more specifics.
All right, thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Leah Eggers. I'm a director at JFF, and a lot of my work focuses on our pathways work in different places across the country. And before I dive into talking a little bit more about the intersection of sector strategies alongside pathways and give a little bit of an illustrative example of some of our work, I wanted to just get a sense of what everyone in the room's engagement has been with sector strategies in your region. And so I'm launching a quick poll here. You should see it pop up on your screen. So the question is, which best describes how you or your organization are currently engaging with sector strategies? So you might be exploring it, participating occasionally, an active partner, or I see a few responses coming in that we actually have some folks who are leading or convening a sector partnership in their region. So great to see that we have a pretty big mix of folks across the board. Maybe just a couple who are not yet engaging in sector strategies, but looking like most of the people in the room are engaged in this in some way. So can take another second to finish the question and you can see where everyone falls. So great to see that some folks are already involved, and hopefully today you'll get some ideas for kind of deepening your sector work. But also once we get to the time to have some conversation or put things in the chat if you have expertise to offer as well. And then I am also curious for kind of our second poll question to learn in your region, which sectors currently have an organized sector strategy. So let's get this one, get that one launched. Sorry about that. So you can select as many that you know of are happening in your region. So common ones that we see are healthcare, IT or digital jobs, construction and skilled trades, as Sarah mentioned, hospitality for where she is in Florida. Might be something else, or you might not be sure because you're still just starting to get engaged in this work. All right, seeing as I can see on the back end, a lot of healthcare, a little bit of advanced manufacturing, quite a bit of construction and skilled trades, some transportation. Great. Well, I'll share those results quick so you can see where folks are coming from today. So a bit of a mix in the room, not as much around clean energy or transportation, but that just might depend on who's here in the room and what the priorities are for your region. So I am going to, or want to start with a little bit of quick framing for how Katie, you can actually keep it on the last slide before we go into this one. I want to start with just some quick framing about how we're thinking about the linkage between pathways and sector strategies. You may have joined this conversation because you're engaged in pathways related efforts in your region, and sector strategies are what really give pathways their focus and employer alignment. And while pathways really turn those sector strategies into concrete options for learners and workers. So when we talk about sector strategies, as Sarah mentioned, it's the regional employer-driven approach that brings together cross-sector partners across a range of sectors, and really creates that mobility and better jobs for young people and adults. And pathways are how that strategy actually shows up for those learners and workers. So it's the structured sequences of coursework, advising, work-based learning, and credentials that start with exploration, lead to entry-level roles, and create on-ramps to advancement over time. And when they're designed well, pathways can get people multiple ways in, multiple ways to go, and not necessarily just a single narrow track into one occupation. And so with that framing in mind, and to further describe what this looks like, I'll walk us through an example of work in Montgomery County, Ohio, with one of our longtime Pathways to Prosperity Network partners, the Montgomery County Educational Service Center. So now you can go to the next slide. We have worked alongside them over the last 6 or 7 years to create pathway models for sectors that are growing in the region, have high demand for workers, whether that's because of new employers coming into the region, retirements, or different changes in the labor market. So we've worked with them to define and build and implement pathways in sectors like healthcare, IT, aerospace and aviation is a big one because they have an Air Force base there, as well as advanced manufacturing. And for IT and computer science, we designed this one that's a little bit different than some other pathways because there are occupations here that lead into jobs in multiple industries, which will be a theme that we talk about today as we go into talking about digital jobs. So this slide just gives you an illustrative example of all of the components of pathways, of a pathway that leads into multiple occupations across a range of employers in the region. Next slide. So how are employers and industry engaged when we talk about cross-sector partners being engaged in sector strategies? So what employers help us do is to define what roles are a priority due to industry growth or other factors, and then help educators and training providers design those pathways into opportunities across a range of employers in the region. And a big part of the work is sector partnerships really help define the competencies, those important skills that students and job seekers need to be successful in the workforce in that particular sector. So employers and industry councils can help clarify those essential technical and employability skills for the sector. So in the case of that pathway that I just showed you in Dayton, Ohio, we had employers from a sector partnership, from a trade association, and through other business and industry councils who are deeply involved in advising on selecting occupations, for helping us work through those technical competencies. Actually just presented to the sector partnership in that region yesterday to present the technical competencies that were in there, because we're undergoing a revision process now. Because if you looked really closely at that small text on the screen, there's no mention of AI because it's a few years old. So what are the ways that we're continuing to keep the tools that educators and training providers are using to design programming to be relevant for industry? Because in doing this work together with employers, education and training providers can then use those competencies to shape their curriculum, their credentials, and work-based learning experiences. And we look towards employers to work alongside those educators to do that work. And those sector initiatives often result in shared work-based learning structures, which give young people exposure to the sector over time. That really builds their skills. So it's not just training them at the point of employment. And emerging sector approaches emphasize improving job quality in the sector, ensuring learners have access to multiple occupations and advancement routes across sectors. So digital jobs, for example, show up across healthcare, public sector, and general business. So even as we were creating that pathway model as it's been implemented, it's not just folks in an IT business who are seated at the table. We have the largest health systems in the region who are also a part of those conversations. And so next slide. So where does all this collaboration actually take place between cross-sector partners? So it's happening in industry groups, trade associations, and sector partnerships. So there's a couple there on the screen in particular that have been deeply engaged in Dayton, Ohio, both crucial partners for competency development, informing curriculum and priority credentials, and designing work-based learning. In addition to having a regional sector focus, Montgomery County has a regional business advisory council, which represents over 20 school districts in the region that set pathways-related goals, track progress, support school districts with career-connected learning and work-based learning, and that includes K-12, post-secondary, workforce development, industry, and employers coming together to design and execute that work. And then there's also cross-sector convenings and events where cross-sector partners are coming together. In particular, for IT and computer science, we held things called implementation labs, where those partners came together, spent a whole day together to think about how do we take this theoretical thing that we mapped onto a piece of paper and actually make that a reality in our education system. And then employers also come together to provide opportunities for educators and training providers through things like externships, other tours, to make sure that educators and training providers are well connected with what the sector needs. And so this is just one quick illustrative example of what this work looks like in practice for partners to be working together on a specific sector in one region. And I'm now going to transition it to my colleague Shannon, who's actually going to dive a little bit deeper into digital jobs in particular to talk about a digital job strategy and resources that you all can take with you today.
Thanks so much, Leah. Hi, everyone. So good to be with you here today. My name is Shannon Seho, and I'm a senior manager at JFF. I'm based in the Sacramento area of Northern California, and I've been with JFF for a little over 3.5 years, and I lead and contribute to projects across multiple practices and centers with the organization, including the employer and workforce strategies practice. But I'd say majority of my work all focuses on all things career pathways. And I'm really excited to kick us off to talk about digital jobs pathways in particular, and some of our recent work in building field capacity for pathways from a sector strategy standpoint. And so as we shift into the next section on digital jobs, we're really going to zoom in on digital jobs, in particular, what they are, why they matter right now, and how we at JFF are working with partners to expand pathways into these roles. So in terms of JFF's digital job strategies, it's really grounded in the reshaping that is taking place as a result of digital technologies. They're really reshaping every industry and redefining what it takes to succeed in today's workforce. And often in roles that don't require a four-year degree, but they do require the right mix of skills and credentials. And so sector strategies give regions a way to come together around these shifts and unpack what they mean locally. So at JFF, we partner with employers, educators, workforce development agencies, community-based organizations, policymakers, all the stakeholders to make sure that workers at every stage of their careers can access quality jobs. Our vision is a future where technology creates more pathways to opportunity, especially for people who have been excluded from tech and digital roles in the past. Next slide, please. To ground this conversation, I will be using a working definition of digital jobs. And so, based on prior work in the field and analysis of labor market data, we define digital role jobs as roles where people with IT expertise, they help organizations build, maintain, or upgrade computer systems, networks, or software, with a particular emphasis on things like cloud computing, data, and cybersecurity. So in plain language, these are jobs where workers use their technical skills to keep systems running, protect data, and then support digital tools that many organizations rely on every day. And importantly, this definition, it cuts across other sectors and industries. It's not just tech companies that you'll see these roles in. We see industries such as healthcare, public administration, manufacturing, education, and so many more, where these digital roles are important and pivotal. So I'd really invite you to hold this working definition in mind as a shared reference point as we look at research findings and talk about regional sector strategies for digital jobs where partners come together to impact these digital shifts. You can stay on this slide, thank you. So now I want to place the digital jobs within the broader ecosystem because as Sarah shared, this isn't just about one training program or one employer partner. So our strategy is organized around the four core pillars: access and inclusion, stronger IT pathways, clarity on skills and credentials, and finally, employer commitments. In the spirit of time, I'm going to keep us going so we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So I want to close this section by connecting JFF's strategy to recent work to expand field capacity. So we had three kind of overarching goals. First, we worked to build education and workforce system capacity in two specific locations, which you hear about more, in Massachusetts, showing how regions can strategically create, strengthen, and expand digital jobs pathways. We also conducted field research on the labor market value of different IT credentials, so partners have a clearer picture of which ones truly support on-ramps into quality jobs. Spoiler alert, there's over 50,000 IT credentials, and my colleague Ray will be sharing more about that next. And then third and finally, we developed field-facing tools and resources, which we're really excited to share with you as we wrap up our section, including the research that Ray will be sharing about, as well as a toolkit for intermediaries that Shanir will be sharing, to really help regional and national stakeholders strengthen their digital jobs pathways for workers and learners. But I wanted to end with just reiterating that we've seen the value of sector strategies play out in real time with the two sites we worked with, in particular, two workforce boards in Massachusetts, Mass Hire Boston and Mass Hire Central Region, as they navigated volatility in the tech sector even over a year time span last year. They really unearthed the impacts of AI and those impacts both from training provider perspectives and employer perspectives. So using a sector strategy approach, they brought partners together to really understand how AI was reshaping entry-level tech jobs in their region, and surfacing both challenges and new opportunities for digital pathways. It resulted in insightful and ongoing conversations among these partners, including the regional training and employer partners. So again, across all of this, the emphasis on building capacities in regions and systems. And the resources you'll hear about are meant to give employers, training providers, and workforce facing organizations practical guidance on things like work-based learning, curriculum alignment, and career navigation. So now I'll pass it over to my colleague, Ray.
Excellent. Thanks, Shannon. So hi, y'all. Ray Barbosa. I'm a senior analyst here at JFF. Been here for about, let's see, eight years now. And I support projects across the organization largely through labor market analysis and as well as supporting general kind of qualitative and quantitative research. So for this next section, I'll walk us through some of our findings on the landscape of digital jobs. So we'll cover how digital jobs have expanded across sectors, get into a few examples, as well as talk about a few kind of key credentials and the role that they play from an employer perspective. Certainly, they're critical to this digital jobs and how they function, but also kind of talking about other factors that come into play, such as, skills, work experience, this sort of thing. Finally, we'll talk about some potential approaches to digital jobs and in different contexts and draw from some regional examples. Shannon noted, or yeah, I think Shannon noted one of our examples in Boston, which we'll talk a bit about, and some lessons that we've learned, as well as strategies that might be useful to apply for your region. And certainly encourage folks to check out the resource that we'll be sharing that kind of get into a few different regional examples. So we can kick over to the next slide. So it's kind of been teed up a bit already, but as technology is increasingly integrated across sectors, across roles, whether through automation or even AI, it requires you can kind of see how digital jobs are kind of more and more integrated across sectors. So as was noted earlier, it's not all kind of focused within tech sectors, but really kind of technical roles across sectors. So you may think of kind of more traditional tech roles like support specialists, network admins, programmers, this sort of thing. And while those roles are increasingly existing across sectors, there are also what might be called kind of hybrid roles where they're traditionally kind of non-tech roles that increasingly have a technical function. So these can look, a couple different ways across sectors. So in healthcare, that might be folks involved with managing systems like Epic, those are the electronic medical record systems. It might be, managing systems in advanced manufacturing where you're kind of maintaining automated processes, or even in finance, like thinking about analytical tools and this sort of thing. And so kind of related to that, similar to how each region has different dynamics in terms of key sectors, demand for these digital jobs will vary not only by sector, but also region to region, considering how the interplay of different sectors and which may be larger sectors within a particular region. And so to the left, you'll see some kind of just general examples of how these traditional digital jobs might look across sectors. So these may be, support specialists within a healthcare context. So you could imagine folks that are troubleshooting things within an electronic medical record platform. These might be network or database administrators in public administration. I know that one was a big one that came up in the Boston region, of just public administration being one of the larger sectors there. And you'll see also, and we'll get into this a bit more, there are kind of some key credentials that are associated with each of these roles. And so we can kick over to well, before I get into that, just understanding that these key credentials are kind of important. There are some that kind of appear across sectors, across employers, and then there are some that may be more specialized, more niche, but critical when looking at kind of specific roles. And as Shannon noted earlier, there are over 50,000 credentials out there. I imagine that number is probably growing. And so just understanding which ones are in demand and in which instances can be really important. Okay, we can kick over to the next slide. So there are kind of a few pieces to consider here. As noted, while there are thousands of kind of key or thousands of kind of IT and related credentials, there are a handful that come across sectors as being in demand. And I'm sure some of you are probably familiar with these, but like your CompTIAs, like CompTIA A+, network security, this sort of thing, Cisco credentials, as well as things from Microsoft or even like Amazon, like AWS. And of course, there are others, and as noted, it's not to say that those other ones are not valuable, but it may be that those are more specific, like sector specific, role specific, these sorts of things. But I think kind of zooming out a little bit, credentials are certainly not the end all and be all when it comes to digital jobs. In talking to employers throughout our different regions that we engaged, we also found that employers are looking for indicators of work experience, hands-on experience, as well as skills. And so I think a big piece that also emerged from that work is not only what credentials folks have and what skills that they possess in their experience, but also their ability to articulate them. Certainly, that's a piece I think that's really important. And I think one of the employers that we even talked to noted that that was one of their big indicators was not only, what is noted on the resume, but how well um, prospective workers might be able to articulate those skills, not only, what they learned, but how they've applied them, this sort of thing. Um, and I think there's a couple of other considerations too. So kind of noting again that not all credentials are necessarily hold the same weight for all employers, and some of them even mentioned certain pieces of it, like you know, certain credentials being more perceived to be more valuable depending on how long they take. I think one of them put it as pointedly as it may not hold as much weight if you can get that particular credential within an hour. Hence, things like CompTIA or Cisco kind of holding a certain value premium, so to speak, because of kind of the rigor that goes behind earning those credentials. So again, kind of as a counterpoint, while credentials are not the end all be all, they can also kind of be something that can ultimately sway a hiring decision. So thinking about if two resumes are relatively similar, someone with even something like a PMP or thinking about digital roles, yeah, like your CompTIA A plus may be able to kind of that may be the thing that uh, uh, swings the decision one way or another. So all to say, I think a big piece of this of digital jobs is understanding that credentials play a huge role, but also kind of understanding that employers are kind of looking at a mosaic of indicators when looking at a talent pipeline. Okay, next slide, please. And so kind of as also has been kind of set up in earlier parts of this, I think, there just coordination across key organizations within a region are critical for alignment and coordination. So I think, this ensures that one, learners are kind of aligned with job market needs. So just understanding what employers need across sectors can be really useful in making sure that folks are positioned to kind of fill those roles as they gain credentials, complete trainings, this sort of thing. And that also gives employers kind of a good, stable pipeline to draw talent from. And so I think just being able to convene folks is really critical in helping create this coordination across systems, across organization types, this sort of thing within a region, and as was noted earlier, across sectors. So knowing that across sectors there are certain credentials that are highly valuable and in demand, and then also knowing that kind of there are certain skills that are both transferable and in demand across the labor market. Just kind of having a sense of these things can be really useful. And so, obviously, access to like labor market information can be really useful in kind of getting a sense of these things. But I think also just being able to engage employers and have them talk to training providers can be another great way of just ensuring alignment. Because, even on kind of non-technical skills, professional skills like communication or working with a team, different places may kind of have very specific or differing definitions of what those things are, and just having them be able to have a common language or a common understanding of those things can be important in creating those connections. And so I know in Boston, one of the key players was the workforce system that acts as kind of this network convener. And so that brings together partners from multiple sectors, as well as various employers across sectors, and training providers in order to kind of coordinate this large workforce, large scale workforce, as well as like the various assets that each of those stakeholders provide. So again, really useful in places like Boston where the market is sometimes saturated with folks that, hold high educational levels, may have a bunch of credentials, and just making sure that those needs are coordinated, and also ensuring kind of not only on ramps into these jobs, but also kind of the ability for folks to transition not only upwards in terms of their role over their career, but also across sectors as those needs within a region shift. So again, like in Boston, for example, knowing that you know, while kind of tech jobs, at least, so one of the specific examples that we looked at, for example, was computer user support specialist. job postings for those have largely decreased over the last couple of years, not by a ton, but certainly you see kind of a slide in those roles. But there is still a huge need for those same skills across sectors, particularly in healthcare or public administration. So just ensuring that people kind of know um, additional credentials or even skills to pick up in order to make those transitions, I think is really important. Okay, so I think we can hit over to the next slide, and I'll pass over to my colleague Shanair.
Okay. Thanks, Ray. Hi, everyone. My name is Shannon Williamson. I'm a director here at JFF. I'm based in New Jersey, and I've spent a lot of time working on the digital jobs portfolio while here at JFF. So I'm excited to share more about our digital jobs pathways toolkit. But before we dive into the details, I want to ground us in what this toolkit actually is. So at its core, the toolkit is a capacity building systems change resource for intermediaries. So the backbone organizations that bring together employers, educators, community partners, and help all working together to build sustainable career pathways. Intermediaries offer a variety of service, but the primary role in a pathways ecosystem is really always to act as the glue. So coordinating employers, education providers, workforce partners, CBOs toward a shared regional vision. And this toolkit supports that leadership across 3 phases of pathway development that you see on the graphic outlined on your screen. So phase 1, understanding sector, stakeholders, and regional needs. Phase 2, building pathways and strengthening partnerships. And phase 3, sustaining services, systems, and strategies. And across all phases, there are 5 cross-cutting priorities that guide this work. Strengthening pathways and partnerships, building employer commitment, facilitating network building, and advancing regional supportive services, as well as managing programs effectively. So this toolkit really isn't just about launching a program. It's really about building coordinated, resilient systems. Next slide, please. So this slide showcases how the toolkit is actually structured, and each bullet you see represents a distinct tool that's included in the resource. But throughout the resource, tools show up in various forms. You'll be able to engage with guides, worksheets, assessments, as well as interactive exercises. But in each of the phases, there are 3 tools. And taking a closer look at phase 1, the tools that are included are first, key considerations in the digital job sector. So this resource really provides a strategic overview of the workforce landscape, helping intermediaries take a closer look at AI-driven shifts, credential trends, and the growing importance of durable skills. It really helps intermediaries quickly get grounded in national trends and being able to interpret local implications. Second, the Labor Market and Employer Needs Analysis Guide. This guide translates raw labor market data, so all of what Ray was just referencing, into clear, usable insights. Being able to identify high-growth occupations, being able to validate that demand with employers in your ecosystem, and also being able to prioritize what the right roles are. Third is the Regional Pathways Assessment. This assessment helps intermediaries assess existing partnerships, so regional assets, as well as gaps in the ecosystem, making sure that you're able to guide investment and partnership building decisions. And together, these 3 tools create a shared understanding and align partners around real regional demand. In phase 2, the tools that are featured are the career pathway mapping tool. So this visually aligns occupations, credentials, and advancement opportunities, making progression crystal clear for learners and employers. And then the pathway implementation planning worksheet turns strategy into coordinated action. So this worksheet helps to clarify goals, readiness, roles, timelines, as well as monitoring structures. And then the employer engagement maturity model, which helps intermediaries assess and deepen employer relationships and partnerships over time. Then in phase 3, we really see this shift from focus to durability. So the tools that are included here are Supportive Services Integration Guide, which embeds wraparound services directly into pathway design, Sustainability Planning Worksheet, which helps intermediaries examine how to braid funding streams, formalize shared accountability, and plan for long-term viability. And then also the Digital Jobs Pathways case study. So this really shares real-life examples of how regions are operationalizing this work. And some of these examples have already been referenced in this chat today. But while each tool can be used independently, one thing to emphasize is that they are designed to build upon one another, with the intention from moving regions from understanding to implementation to long-term sustainability. Next slide, please. So in our conversation today, we also wanted to spotlight a few of the tools that are included in the toolkit. So the first is the Labor Market and Employer Needs Analysis Guide, because it's one of the tools that really helps to anchor this entire pathways process. So effective career pathways begin with a grounded understanding of both the local labor market realities and what exactly the employer demand is. So this tool helps intermediaries identify high growth digital occupations, analyze wage thresholds and demographic participation, validate skills demand directly with employers, and develop a prioritized list of digital jobs. It essentially moves regions beyond the generic, like where and what are tech job conversations, and more towards like these specific data informed occupational focused conversations, especially now in the landscape that we're in, where we're being shaped by AI, the credential system, and what's available is rapidly evolving. Intermediaries really need a structured way to translate complex labor market data into clear decisions. So this guide really ensures that the pathway designs begins with shared evidence and shared employer validations, not a set of assumptions. Next slide, please. The next tool we wanted to spotlight was the employer engagement maturity model. So phase 2 in the toolkit really marks the turning point where analysis becomes action. So employer engagement is central to that shift. So the employer engagement maturity model helps intermediaries assess the current level of employer partnership and really chart a path forward towards deeper collaboration. So it clarifies the difference between just transactional engagement, so attending meetings or having an employer partner participate in a panel, but really moving towards co-ownership models where we see employers instead helping shape curriculum, program design, aligning hiring practices, as well as shared accountability for program outcomes. Employer engagement is never going to be this one size fits all type of arrangement or approach, but this model really provides a structured way to tailor outreach, deepen trust, and then just really move towards strategic partnership, because durable career pathways really depend on more than just participation. They depend on shared ownership. Next slide, please. And the last tool that we wanted to spotlight for you is one of the case studies that's actually featured in the toolkit. So this is for Mass Hire Boston, also known as Boston PIC. But the Mass Hire Boston example really illustrates intermediary leadership in practice. So Greater Boston has a strong demand for digital talent across sectors, but the ecosystem is very fragmented. Job seekers face multiple credentials. There's lots of training providers and just overall unclear hiring signals. Mass Hire didn't focus on building new programs. What they instead focused on was clear alignment. So they really acted as a regional hub, clarifying employer demand for digital and AI skills, and then also aligning training providers, community partners, and recruitment efforts around shared expectations. Their strategies included a series of employer-facing events, partnerships with the Boston public school system, as well as connecting high school students to employer-paid summer jobs and tech internships. And in just over a year, they were able to engage more than 400 young people through this strategy, more than doubling their original goal that they had set out. But what's most important, I think, in this example is the system's role that they played in all of this. They reduced fragmentation, clarified demand, and made digital pathways easier to navigate and overall more accessible. And I think that's the kind of backbone coordination that this toolkit is designed to support. Next slide, please. So to summarize, as you think about the Digital Jobs Toolkit and how it can be a resource for you in your work, it's just really important to remember that the tools are designed to build upon each other. They can be used independently, just also based on your new regional needs as an alternative. Some regions may need to start in phase 1, so understanding that maybe building that shared understanding and validating employer demand is where you're currently at and where you might need to begin your process. Others might already have that alignment and they just really need stronger implementation planning or employer engagement strategies. And then there's some regions who are already, focused on long-term resilience. So their focus is going to be on prioritizing sustainability and supportive service integration. The toolkit truly provides something for everyone at every stage. So the goal is really being able to equip intermediaries to lead coordinated, learner-centered, employer-aligned pathway programs that can truly adapt over time. But that's it for me on the toolkit. Thank you, everyone. I'll pass it back over to Jerry.
Thanks, y'all. Yeah, you can go to the next slide, Haiti, and it's like kind of you all really packed a lot of information in a really nice way. So thank you. I'm taking like a big breath for all of you. Like that was a really good job of getting through everything so that we could fully kind of lay out what this work looks like on the ground and what it looks like in theory and practice. So we'd love to turn the conversation over to those of you in the room um, to think about the connection to your own work. And this is not necessarily a sequential list that you all have to answer, but a starting point, any of these questions, something you might do or are doing already, something you can try. And a question we've like really latched onto recently and thinking about all things learner centered and pathways focused of what's a risk worth taking to push partners in the field to maybe think or act differently. Um, we had a great question in the chat, close to the top of the meeting. And in addition to pulling your attention to all the resources that have been mentioned are now linked in the chat for you. So thanks, team, for sharing those. And Sarah, I was just going to give you a chance to, you had a nice exchange in the chat about like, how do you incentivize industry to engage? There's a nice exchange there. I just want to see if you want to add color to anything.
Yeah, Amanda, thank you for the good questions. And please feel free to come off mute. I think you can if you want to chime in as well. Because it's a good question, right? Like, that's the biggest pain in all of this. A lot of times, if you're coming from workforce or education, is like, how do I get the employers to play ball with me? And I just want to name of like, yes, it's super frustrating and it is a challenge. So putting that like number one, I hear you. Um, I think part of it also is that as a field, I'm not saying you, Amanda, but like as a field, we have a tendency to, we're going to start up a new advisory council for industry. We're going to start up a new committee or sector partnership, which again is like a way you might implement a sector strategy. But I think it's really important to see where the employers already are. And that might be where you go. So maybe you don't need to stand up an advisory council. Maybe you have a really active tech industry association where you live. That was certainly true when I lived in Colorado. Maybe you have a really active group, like your chamber might be like where the action is, and maybe you come to them, and it could be that they might not get to your thing for like the first year, but you're at the table, you're building relationships. Like making sure it is a relational piece, I think is really important. Amanda and I were talking in the chat about, one of the biggest draws for employers is we use the word peers. They want to know what their peers are doing. It's also their competitors, right? So part of this is them getting to know what their competitors locally are doing. So I think patience, like one great example I saw when I lived in New York City was the sector partnership there convened a day where they had, I think, 7 different community colleges, because there are that many in New York City and more. But they had 7 community colleges bring their curriculum, and they had a curriculum review day, and it was a party for the employers. They had a blast. They basically went round robin to tables reviewing curriculum for half a day. And that didn't involve a whole lot of extra convenings outside of where the employers already were. And it was a way to say that what do we all need as educators is we all need your input to make sure we're teaching the right things. But instead of us asking you for that individually, we're going to come together and organize ourselves so that we're making a singular ask to you. So I think there's ways to really get creative about the fact that you don't need to invent this on your own. That partnership doesn't have to be you starting something new. See where people are, see how you can make it fun. We all want to be involved with something fun, right? And I think it can be fun and impactful. So I'll leave it there, but welcome folks to come off chat in terms of how they've approached this challenge of getting employers to be meaningfully engaged.
Thank you, Sarah. And thanks, Amanda, for prompting the conversation. Yeah, we've got time for another question or two, and then we'll do a little bit of a closeout. All right. hearing no more questions or seeing no more questions come through, we'll close out with just a little bit of a preview of what's ahead with this community. So our next in our learning series will come up on March 31st. So at the end of next month, focusing on how social emotional learning supports dual enrollment. We love all things dual enrollment here at JFF and have really deep expertise over decades of doing work in dual enrollment. So that will be a great one for sure. So share that with your colleagues. And then April will take the month off from virtual learning because we have our in-person institute. So our in-person institute is twice a year, typically in April and October. It's an amazing way to connect with leaders across the country, usually around 200 or so from pretty much all the places you saw represented today and more. So we look forward to those. And this year, this institute, we're really picking up on some themes from last October, if any of you joined us there, in which we're really focusing on the agency of young people and learners in defining their own pathways and how we can empower and supplement what they already have as strong instincts and clear aspirations. We're also going to focus on the ongoing conversation around how AI is impacting entry-level work and what pathways leaders can do to prepare and respond. And then we'll also think about higher education at the intersection of those two major themes of empowering youth in the way that they want to pursue their pathways, but also being connected to the needs of the workforce and the changing, shifting landscape of work and learning over time. So we're really excited about that. If you're on our newsletter, so look out for we're going to be dropping the speakers who we're going to be featuring here in the next communications. And if you are interested in registering or sending some of your colleagues to that, we can also reach out to us at the P2P network, and we can put you on an invite list. All right. The link in the chat there for our newsletter to share. You're likely on it if you're here, but if you want to share that with colleagues who might be interested in our next events, please do so. It always helps to grow this coalition, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thanks to all of our speakers today. Great job. Thanks, everyone.